I'm Manny.
I'm Noah.
And this is Devin. And this is No Such Thing, the show where we settle our dumb arguments and yours by actually doing the research. On today's episode, we figure out what is actually going on with the TSA.
I think the TSA's blanket response is always either we're following the procedure exactly or we're preventing the next 9/11, so just deal with it.
There's no such thing. No such thing. No such thing. No such thing. No such thing.
So we're all about to take our first trip together to an undisclosed location.
First trip?
Yeah.
First flight? We've never been on a trip?
Where
No,
have we
not
gone?
all three of us.
Whoa.
Where have we gone?
I don't know. You're right.
We've done like day trips, but we haven't done
New
like
Jersey.
Overnight. This is our
Yeah, we
first
went to the
overnight.
horse.
New Jersey's our first
sanctuary.
out-of-state adventure together.
That's actually shocking.
Yeah, so this is going to be well, by the time this comes out, we would have been on this trip.
Yeah, that's true.
So, got me thinking about
Sure.
the TSA,
Yeah.
which got me thinking about, this is a core memory. It was 2015, 2016. It just come out that you could look at all your Google data and see like all the information that Google had about you.
Mm-hmm. God, I know where this is going.
So we were all looking to see like, all right, how old does Google think I am? All that sort of stuff. And then we also realized that you can get your voice recordings if you have like a Google Home. So none of us had a Google Home except Manny at the time.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
So we were curious what was on Manny's Google Home recordings.
Which is an immediate violation of privacy, but we'll just continue
As
the
we all
story.
gathered around your computer.
Yeah.
You were about to go on a trip.
Yeah.
And you had asked the Google Home maybe a dozen times, can I bring X on a plane?
I remember this instance because I think I was literally packing, and as I was packing, I just kept saying, I would pick something up and be like, "Hey Google, can I take this? Will TSA let me bring this?"
Toothpaste on the plane.
And so when we looked at the saved responses, it was just like 12 in a row. It's like back to back to back. Can I bring like a razor? Can I bring my portable battery? But I will say I had a great reason to keep asking those questions because I still to this day don't know what I can bring and what I can't bring.
You know what? That's what I was gonna say. We're a little bit older now. Nearly 10 years later. I would like to apologize.
Wow, thank
we
you.
were clowning you at the time. But Manny is not unique in this. Now, every time I travel, I don't, I'm not asking my Google Home, but I do. And you sit and think, like, wait, how much liquid am I allowed to bring? Do I actually have to put them in a plastic bag? Mm-hmm. I travel a few times a year. I'm not like someone who's traveling like every other week. But I travel, I guess, not often enough to have that moment where I have to stop and think about what I can bring.
Same here.
Yeah.
This group is not alone in being confused by the TSA rules. It is the sort of thing that every time I think, okay, this is going to be the time I get it right. And every time I'm more and more confused. Every time I go, the signs are different than what the TSA agents are telling me to do.
Yep.
And half the things I'm like, do I actually have to do that? Like now, I don't actually put my liquids in a large plastic bag. I don't do that anymore.
I mean, the laptop's another one. Like,
laptop's a major.
I'm flying
major
way more often this year than I usually am, and so I'm starting to track this stuff anecdotally. But I was on my way from Atlanta to New York, and the sign says, "Take your laptop out," or any device that's bigger than your phone.
Yep.
So I start to do that, and then the TSA agent says, "Stop." You don't have to take your laptop out. He's like yelling at me.
That's
gonna
the
arrest
thing.
you.
And
That's
I'm like,
the thing that bothers me. Why like it's confusing.
Yeah. And I guess in my head, I'm like, okay, maybe there are some shifts where they can be more lax, but why don't you just say, hey, you don't have to take it out?
Yep.
Why are you screaming at me?
Well, that's what's frustrating.
Yep.
All due respect to hard workers of TSA, but it's like I don't live here. I'm not here every day like you. Yeah. So why should I be expected to understand this, especially when signage and history has told me to do this? It doesn't make any sense.
I have respect because they see a billion people every day. But what I don't have respect for is that I can't expect what to do. Now, if the rule was the same every time and I was still fucking up,
every single lane,
that's on you.
Go off on me. Yeah. I deserve it.
Lock him up.
But if it says take your laptop out and I'm trying to do it and you're yelling at me, where do we go from here?
That's what drives
shoes
me crazy.
I mean, it's crazy.
That the rules are different. They don't match the signs. They don't match what you look up online. And it's not even the same. It's not even like every time I go to JFK, it's this. Yeah. It's like, okay, this part of JFK is different than this part of JFK. So it's like, all right, it's confusing. So what? I get if you're going to tell me something different, sure, I could follow that. You just don't have to yell at me like I'm a fucking idiot.
Yeah.
Because the thing right here is telling me to do something different than what you're telling me.
And God forbid if you point that out like I have.
Oh.
I'll be like,
you're braver than the truth.
Yeah. I'll be like, oh, that's interesting because look at the sign that's literally right behind you.
Yep.
And then they'll just get even more pissed.
So this creator, Regicus, did this TikTok. It's almost 3 years old now, but I think it perfectly captures sort of what we're talking about.
Take your laptops and electronics out the bag. If you got a hoodie on, take it off. Take it off.
I'm traumatized listening to this.
How many times I gotta get touched? Sorry, is this your bag? Slotty damn.
Feels like drill sergeants. Almost.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's like a level of anxiety that like going through security I just have at all times.
Yeah,
and I'm someone who's very fucking good at following directions.
Yeah.
Like I'm one of those, okay, that says that. I'm ready. I got my shit ready to go.
Yeah.
My shoes are a little bit slipped off. Like,
I always
ready
go
to move.
in shoes that are easy to take off.
Yep.
I don't even wear a belt to the airport.
No.
Got my laptop separate from my other shit to make it easy to come out.
Yep.
And now, we're younger too.
Exactly.
We're not young, but we're younger. And like sometimes I'll go through the line and see old people getting screamed.
Yes. Yelled at.
Elder
it's
abuse.
like no fucking mercy.
Granny is getting like you fucking idiot, Granny. Figure it out.
Yeah.
Take your, I guess she doesn't have to take her shoes off. Oh, then they yell at Granny because she's old, so she doesn't have to take her shoes off. She doesn't know that.
Yeah.
And it's just like...
Meanwhile, planes weren't even around when this woman was born. She's learning with the rest of the world.
Her last flight was with the Wright brothers.
This is Amelia Earhart.
And y'all are screaming at her. So yeah, this is... It seems like there could be a better way to do this.
I mean, I'm curious like how TSA does decide, if it does decide the differences between airports. Is it domestic versus international? Is there a system in place?
Yeah, airport to airport.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious, like we haven't even touched on this yet, but we go through all this bullshit. Does this actually even work?
Yeah. Like, is it all just theater?
Like, why can't I bring a water bottle on a plane? Like, come on.
Yeah.
I know one guy tried to do one thing one time, but it's water.
The universal solvent. And I can't carry it on
You
the plane.
can bring water everywhere else.
Now, I'm okay if they ban Dasani. But
they should.
my regular water bottle should be fine.
What brand is this?
No Dasani!
All right,
Put it in the trash.
You're good.
Pour it out. All right, so we'll get some answers to some of those questions after the break. And I chat with a reporter who tells me the darkest TSA story I have ever heard.
No such thing. No such thing.
All right, we're back. This is No Such Thing. How have you been? So you're in Texas, right?
I am in Texas, Dallas.
So I appreciate you taking the time to hop on. Can I just have you introduce yourself, so name and sort of what you do?
Sure. My name is Darryl Campbell. I'm an aviation safety writer for the tech website The Verge, and I've also got a book coming out. It's called Fatal Abstraction: Why the Managerial Class Loses Control of Software.
So a few years ago, Darryl wrote this deep dive for The Verge called The Humiliating History of the TSA. I loved your article. I thought it was
Thanks.
like so much of the writing around TSA. I feel like sort of really walks around the fact that like it's such a bizarre experience.
Yeah, I really did want to capture the weirdness of it. And I
Yes.
think the key to it was that first anecdote. So this person, her name is Jay Cooper. She's a former TSO who used to work at LaGuardia. And the story she told me was, in a lot of ways, the perfect encapsulation of just how strange and bizarre the TSA experience can be. So she was working at her checkpoint. She noticed someone was crying in the line, and it's an airport, that happens. But when the person came through to her station, so she was the document checker at the front of the line, someone was pushing someone in a wheelchair, and the person in the wheelchair was supposed to hand over their ticket, and she wasn't really being responsive. So Jay asked her, hey, can I have your documents? Can you stand up to do the security check? The person pushing her was crying, and she said, but she can't, because it turns out the person in the wheelchair was dead. What happened was they had checked in a couple hours before, and it was an international flight, so they were just being safe. And the person in the wheelchair had died at some point between check-in and the time that they were going through security. The problem is, once you've checked in, you are entitled to go through security unless a doctor pronounces you dead. And so at that point, airport rules being what they are, there wasn't a doctor on station, so they had to let the person through security. So Jay asked her, okay, well, here's what we have to do. We actually have to take them physically out of the wheelchair, do a pat down on them in a private room, put on the gloves. But they treated her as if she was just another person going through security, even though they were a corpse at that point. It really is just kind of an example of how the TSA has to do its job without question, no matter what, even if the person isn't alive.
Was it clear to TSA that the person passed away?
They knew.
They all knew. Everyone knew.
Everyone knew the person was dead.
There just wasn't a doctor to officially say that.
Yes.
Wow.
But it sort of points to this thing of like the TSA has their rules.
Yeah.
And everyone has to go through security, even if you're dead.
That is the darkest TSA story.
It's pretty dark,
right?
You're
right. Yeah.
So I'm going to take a step back, and I think a lot of people take for granted that the TSA is just, the way we do airport security, but that hasn't always been the case. So can you tell us a bit about how and why the TSA was formed?
So I'm old enough to remember a time before TSA. My parents used to work for the airlines, so I remember being little and actually being able to go up to the gate when my dad had a flight and meet him right at the gate side. After 9/11, the TSA was formed first as part of the Department of Transportation and then was kind of moved over to the Department of Homeland Security once that was formed. But it was really a response specifically to the 9/11 attacks and kind of an overreaction, in my view, of what you really need to do to sort of stop the next 9/11, which is the TSA's primary goal.
Today, we take permanent and aggressive steps to improve the security of our airways. And a new team of federal security managers, supervisors, law enforcement officers, and screeners will ensure all passengers and carry-on bags are inspected thoroughly and effectively. The new security force will be well-trained, made up of U.S. citizens. And if any of its members do not perform, the new undersecretary will have full authority to discipline or remove them.
Before 9/11, though, airport security was relatively uninvasive. You had your metal detectors, you had just private security guards at the checkpoints just saying, okay, if you've got a gun or if you've got a big knife, then you obviously can't take that. But otherwise, you didn't need a ticket to pass through security. And that was because what we think of as hijacking today was actually very different in kind of the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, where people were hijacking airplanes not to use them as suicide weapons, but really as political statements.
Between 1968 and 1972, there were over 130 American planes that were hijacked, with most of those hijackers wanting to go to Cuba.
There was a man up in the cockpit with a gun, that we were going to Havana, that there was nothing to panic about.
Passengers calm during most of this?
They were calm. Most of them were totally calm during most of this.
They were very nice. We had a nice dinner over there in the airport. A couple of drinks, all on the house. It's hard to complain about that.
Were you frightened at any point?
No, I don't think anybody was.
You find out you're on a hijacked plane, you're like, I gotta go to a different city now.
My wife's going to kill me.
And then, getting to the 70s, it got a little out of hand. And then Nixon came through and was like, all right, like we need to have a little bit more security.
And so that's where they installed the private security guards and the metal detectors.
President Nixon has announced several steps designed to counter hijacking.
The White House anti-hijacking plan is in 3 parts. Starting tomorrow, armed guards will ride shotgun on some domestic and international flights. Electronic surveillance at the airports will be increased, and pressures will be brought on the international community to ostracize those countries that do not punish their hijackers.
So, in this security system that you're talking about pre-TSA, were they primarily just looking for weapons? Or is that like the primary, now we're talking about liquids and taking off our shoes and all these.
Yeah, it's gotten crazy. But no, it was 2 main things that they were looking out for. Number one was bombs that could harm an airplane. So like the Lockerbie terrorist example, that happens in checked baggage. So that's something outside of the airport security that we see every day. And then just individual armed hijackers who could pose a threat, but looking for individual being the operative thing, like individual small groups, not 5 or 6 people at a time with box cutters. So it was very specific to the threat that they saw it in sort of the 60s and 70s.
Good morning. America may never be the same, and this is why. A beautiful Tuesday turned tragic when American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. And that was just the beginning.
The 9/11 attacks are almost like the Trojan horse. It's so successful, but also so infamous that it's never going to work again. And if you think about the things that are preventing the next 9/11, quote unquote, there's really 3 things. Number one, reinforced cockpit doors. You can't just walk your way up into a cockpit anymore. You have to have the pilots key you in, and there's a whole system in place. The second is pilot training. Previous forms of hijacking were really just about making a political statement, so pilots were trained to obey and basically do whatever the hijackers wanted. That doesn't happen anymore, and pilots are trained to get the airplane on the ground as quickly as possible and let law enforcement take over. And really, the third thing is passengers are aware of the threat now. And we've seen this in the case of the shoe bomber, the underwear bomber, and I'm sure you've seen all the videos of just people acting weird on airplanes now, and passengers are really on top of them, restraining them, and so on. So I think the whole idea that the TSA was designed to respond to 9/11 is almost outdated from the moment that it was created. Now, there's obviously a kind of public relations aspect to it, too, in that the government needed to seem like it was doing something to respond, and the best way to get people to give them credit, if you like, is to invent a new security apparatus, invent a new processes that touches everybody that wants to fly so that it looks like people are doing things even if what they're actually doing is not so effective. There's a term that someone coined, it's called security theater. It's the whole big show about it, even if there's no kind of metrics that you can track. And actually, that's part of the problem, is that there's really no transparency around how TSA is effective. If you go to the FBI or if you go to the Department of Transportation and say, okay, how do you measure if what you're doing is successful, then they've got a list of, on-time departures, arrests, whatever. For the TSA, it's like, well, we haven't had another 9/11, but how much of that is really because of the TSA?
Darryl told me when you go through a security checkpoint, there are 8 tasks the TSO might be performing.
It's a very regimented process, and in part, it's because when you first become a transportation security officer, that's what you're doing. So there's the ticket checking where you hand your ticket, it gets scanned. There's the security, they call it divestiture, which is a fancy way of saying take off your shoes and your jacket and put it in the bin. There's the person at the actual scanner. There's the person who's operating the personal scanner, the baggage scanner, and there's a bunch of different ones, a supervisor. So it's really kind of like, if you're Catholic, it's like the Stations of the Cross. You kind of move around to each individual one throughout your shifts, but you're supposed to be trained on all of them. And each one has like 5 hours of training for every station. So it's not just a question of people yelling at you to say, take your shoes off, but there are actual steps that they're supposed to follow.
Real quick, he mentioned the Stations of the Cross. Do you guys know what that is? It's such an obscure Catholic reference that he listed.
Yeah. Can you break that down for me?
It's like in every Catholic church you have like the Stations of the Cross around the room. It's like the 12 or 14 like little steps that Jesus took on his way to get crucified.
Oh, okay.
So it's like, okay,
that makes sense.
Number 3, he kissed this woman on the cheek. Number 4, he fell down. Number 5, it's like, but I just thought that was so funny that I don't think that people just dropping that reference.
Next time you watch Passion of the Christ, I'm sure you will be on Easter. Keep that in mind. It's like he's like going through TSA. Think about what he did.
And you also talk about like the compliance factor of it, right? Of like they're constantly monitoring these employees to making sure, like you're saying, they're following the exact steps that they're taught, and how that brews a lot of anxiety within the workers, and then with the travelers as well. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I call it a compliance fetish, but you remember this whole thing a couple of weeks ago about Doge firing a bunch of probationary workers. So every time a new TSO is hired, they are a probationary worker for 2 years, which means they can get fired for any reason. They don't need cause. They don't need a write-up. I mean, if they just don't like the look of you, if you get crossways with the supervisor, you can get fired. So there's this huge fear and anxiety about, I don't want to mess up. I don't even want to be perceived to mess up, which probably makes them, which does make them, in my interviews anyway, really just focused on going as much by the book or getting on the good side of their supervisor as possible. So that's one part of it. And then the second part of it is there's a lot of ways to screw up and only one way to be right, but there's also a lack of standardization of processes, of equipment, even of personnel training, which makes it difficult for the average flyer to know, is this the airport where I take off my shoes and I put my jacket in, or is this the one where I keep my laptop in? There's no incentive for them to make it more traveler friendly. There's a huge disincentive to make a mistake. And so you're always going to get it to the point where they're just like making it worse for the traveler because that's how they keep their jobs. And so they're kind of in an impossible position.
But you see, like, there's just a ton of incentive for them to just do what's right? There's not a lot of flexibility. Even though it's confusing to us, to them, they're like, let me just say and do what I need to make sure my supervisor doesn't yell at me or I don't get in trouble.
Yeah, it makes sense. Like, they're obviously at the end of the day just trying to do their job. And obviously, airport's going to be a super regimented sort of thing. It's not like it's not like a little mom and pop operation where it's like, a bit more flexible. It's like, all right, this guy's good. Like,
let him bring his water bottle. What's the big deal?
It obviously makes sense, especially with the security element. Like, they're going to be uptight in that way.
Yeah.
And like, they just want to keep their job.
Exactly. So Darryl told me a story too that really exemplifies just like how strict they are.
There was one story where a guy confronted someone who was trying to smuggle a bag of cocaine through there. And in order to try and get rid of the evidence, this guy threw the bag of cocaine in the TSO's face. But the problem is, if that guy gets picked for a talk screen that same day and he has residual cocaine in his system, he gets fired on the spot. And there's no appeal, there's no nothing. It's just like, okay, you failed the test, you're fired. And that's the kind of environment that they have to deal with.
I think this anxiety plays a big part, obviously, in the fear they're going to get fired, but they're also just like not paid well. They're one of the lowest paid federal workers.
TSOs start at a lower pay scale than anybody else in the government. They start at something like $35,000 a year, and then after their probationary period, they can get up to $42,000, whereas most other government jobs start at that $42,000 stage, and then they work their way up.
So, like, what is the turnover rate for TSA agents?
It's incredibly high. So, for every 4 officers that it hires, 3 of them are just backfills. So they're basically hiring at 25% faster than they can retain people. And of those people who eventually do get hired, about 20% of them quit in 6 months. So it's just a massive turnover. And I think that's part of the problem around lack of standardization and just how confusing it is, because a lot of these people are relatively new to the job.
$30K a year is insane.
In 2025.
Makes a little bit more sense why they're screaming at me all the time.
Oh yeah,
I would be.
You're getting McDonald's energy because that's the that's the pay that they're getting.
Yeah, fuck.
And you don't even get McDonald's.
No.
At least you get Happy Meals.
So we've been, I think, a little sympathetic to the officers so far. But TSA is often accused of profiling and discrimination.
Don't support that. I'll be the first to say it.
Let it be known that the white man on the podcast was the first to stand up and say discrimination is bad.
I'm waiting on you guys to say something about this.
We really needed to hear this.
You're welcome.
No, I've seen it before. My dad gets crazy searches.
Yeah.
Just for being an older, vaguely Middle Eastern looking guy. He's always getting taken to some room. We see him like 15 minutes later.
You also spend a lot of time talking to passengers, right? And a lot of them have alleged profiling and discrimination. Obviously, TSA denies these claims, but can you just walk us through some of the reporting you did and some of the stories that you heard from passengers?
Yeah, I think the TSA's blanket response is always either we're following the procedure exactly or we're preventing the next 9/11, so just deal with it. And it's been consistent in the 23 years that they've been around. But we know that the TSA gets hundreds of complaints every month for things as varied as civil rights complaints to violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And that's probably a small sliver of it because it's actually very difficult to make a complaint to the TSA. So a couple of people that I profiled in my article, there was one person named Katie Abdu who, when she was 14, she was pulled off an airplane and she was traveling by herself, so she didn't really understand what was going on, but she's of partial Arab descent. And some random security guy takes her off the airplane, submits her to a search, and then she tries to understand exactly what's going on. And as soon as she asks a question, this guy starts patting her down and putting his hand up her skirt and all of these things that really would make anyone uncomfortable, let alone a 14-year-old woman traveling alone.
And then you also had the game developer Rami Ismail.
Yeah, Rami. So Rami is half Egyptian, half Dutch. He's from the Netherlands. He says he has 7 Islamic names. And it's not just that he gets stopped, but the way in which he gets stopped. For example, he was saying that he gets pulled aside at the gate to do a security check, not in a private room like you might be able to do at a security checkpoint, but just at that, like the little plastic folding table by the gate. He gets patted down in full view of everyone. And it is almost this humiliation ritual that he has to endure. It's not because he's done anything wrong. It's really just, oh, there's a guy who looks like the people that everybody says are terrorists. So thank goodness they're patting him down.
At the gate.
At the gate.
That's humiliating.
I just don't understand why you would need to check someone after they went through security.
That seems like more of the theater of it, the security theater.
Yeah, definitely.
They're putting on a little show for people. That's nuts.
So even if you're not harassed by, TSA, going through airport security sucks. So I wanted to know, is this even worth it? How effective are they actually?
So if you ask the TSA directly, they will always just point to one thing, which is that we haven't had another 9/11. There's no other real good measure that they say exists to do that. But I don't think that's true. And in fact, there are security researchers whose livelihood this is who also think that that's not true. So going back to actuarial science, there's a measure that governments use all the time to say, is this cost effective? Is this worth doing? It's called the cost per life saved metric. And it essentially says, here's the amount of money that society has to put in to create an intervention, and here's how much it costs to actually save a life. So a couple examples here. Enforcing mandatory seatbelt laws. It's really cheap. It's about $140 per life saved. Paying for someone to have an inpatient visit to a hospital, even if they're not insured, it's about $1 million per intervention. But the government's threshold is around $10 million per life saved. So that's kind of the metric that they're sort of curving around. For the TSA, the most generous estimate is that it costs about $15 million per life saved. And that makes 2 really big assumptions. Number one, that the TSA is solely responsible for stopping every terrorist attack against the air transport system. And number 2, that there's a 9/11 style attack planned about once a decade.
And unsurprisingly, the price goes way up once you remove those assumptions.
The cost per life saved really gets north of about $500 million, which is, 50 times what the government's normal limit is. So I think that's really, that's probably closer to the ballpark of how effective TSA really is.
So back to the question we started with, right? I know we've touched on it here and there throughout the interview, but I want to know, why are the TSA rules so confusing?
So there's 3 reasons. The first one is just operationally. The TSA has to deal with a huge amount of turnover. Their training takes a long time, and they're getting people who are looking at the TSA as a stepping stone for another law enforcement career. So not a lot of reason for them to stick around. So the people in the front line aren't super motivated to kind of be correct versus pleasing their boss. And the procedures themselves are always in flux. So I think that's number 1. Number 2 is equipment. So not every airport has the same equipment. Your big ones like DFW, like JFK are always going to have more of the top of the line stuff. Some smaller ones, like if you ever fly out of, Lubbock or South Bend or whatever, they may not have the fancy body scanner. So you may have to go through an old school metal detector where they have specific processes. So that's number 2. And then number 3 is there are actually some airports where they've subcontracted it out to private security. And so they have their own types of requirements. They have to be TSA compliant, but there's a lot of leeway in what exactly that means as long as they hit some basic stuff. San Francisco being the main example of that.
In your reporting, did TSA give you any reasoning on why they don't just make it clear even when you're on the line for it, right? I get not knowing ahead of time, right? My experience has been, even when you're at the airport, the signage is telling you different things than TSA agents are telling you. Or I've even had instances where 2 different TSA agents in the same line are telling me conflicting information, where one is saying, take your hoodie off, I'm going to take my hoodie off, and the other one is yelling at me for taking off my hoodie, right? Where it's what am I, it feels like I'm losing my mind. Exactly. Because every time I go, I'm like, this is going to be the time that I do everything right? I'm going to
you're going to get your gold star.
Exactly. But every single time I'm like, this feels like they're just making it up as it goes along, right? There's no consistency to it, and there's no messaging. I get, like you're saying, sometimes there's different machines, right? But I'm just sort of why? Would it not be better for the TSA for people to know what to do? Even if the rules were the same everywhere, people kind of suck at following directions, especially adults. Isn't it more annoying for them that we don't know what we're supposed to be doing when we go to the lines?
Yeah, there's no good answer, first of all. But I think there's 2 reasons why. The first one is the TSA just doesn't have any incentive to make the passenger experience better. Their KPIs are things like, when they have someone coming through to test the quality of the security systems, like % of fake guns smuggled through, which, by the way, is still also unacceptably high. It's like 90% of them get through, but that's what they actually get measured on.
So I looked into this, and after that reporting of 95% of weapons getting through on these tests, a few years later, TSA made some huge improvements, and only 70% of the weapons were able to get through with these tests.
There's no incentive for them to make people 5% happier just because they don't care. And the second thing is there's no pressure from Congress or any elected official to do it, because you don't want to be the guy who voted to defund the TSA and then there's a terrorist attack and you're the guy who voted to do it and you're out of there.
Basically, the way to fix the TSA is by introducing tip culture. If they were working for tips, things might be a lot nicer in there.
It is the most power you have is when you go through and then there's the little smiley faces at the end. How do we do today? And you can press that, and that probably doesn't even do anything. No. It's probably not even recording. It's literally not even on. It's just
it's like when you hand the controller to a kid and it's not plugged in.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not saving anything locally.
All those points make sense.
Why
on the politics side of it, where you wouldn't want to be the guy who's campaigning on defunding TSA or fixing it, and then however many people die because of something.
Yep. It's not gonna be me.
And it makes sense. Ultimately, it is just an inconvenience more than anything else. And it's it sucks. We'll complain about it on this podcast, but we're not gonna not fly because of it. Just sad stuff.
Sad. So actually, just this week, 2 Republican senators. We got Senator Mike Lee and Senator Tommy Tuberville.
Base Mike Lee?
Base Mike Lee.
Yeah. Sounds like it.
They have introduced the bill to abolish the TSA.
Oh my
God. And have airports just go back to the private security apparatus that happened before 9/11. You know, it's only 2 senators signed onto it right now, so I don't know how much momentum it has.
Interesting.
But being more realistic, I wanted to ask Darryl, like, through your reporting, have you talked to people who have just like ideas on how to make, if not TSA, a version of airport security better? Is there, you know, do people have like better ideas of how we should be doing this?
There's kind of 2 schools of thought. I think there's the fairness objection and then there's the effectiveness objection. So the fairness objection would be to remove all of the things that unfairly burden people who, you know, aren't your standard rich business traveler. On the other side, there's the efficiency argument. And you can actually see this in practice in places like Europe, Canada, where they don't have TSA type regimes, but their record of anti-terrorism is pretty much the same. You can do things like replacing these expensive and unreliable machines. You can replace them with things like dog sniffers, where you can walk them up and down the line. They'll sniff for explosives. It's less intrusive. Obviously, it doesn't, you know, reward your big defense contractor donors, but it's more efficient. You can remove some of these absurd pat downs and security checks. Keep the things that are actually keeping us safe, like the explosive scanners and check baggage, but don't go through all of this rigmarole at the security line, because we just know that a lot of it's for show. But again, who's going to have the electoral capital to really be able to do that, especially if, you know, you've got all these people who are just waiting to pounce on the minor security lapse.
So after hearing all this, do you all feel better or worse about TSA? And I'll start by saying I feel more forgiving of the agents and their attitudes, because they're not paid any money.
Yep.
They're treated like shit, so therefore they're treating me like shit. So you know what? Maybe I just gotta take one for the team.
Hurt people, hurt people.
Just let it go.
But it just seems like it's just so dumb to me. And this is like so many things in this country that we are spending so much money on the thing that we know is not effective. But no one wants to do anything about it.
Because there's always the what if.
Yeah.
What if you stop and then, you know?
What if there's another 9/11 because they didn't take our water bottles?
It makes me think about, what am I actually worried about on a flight security-wise? It's a bomb. So, like, if I go to the airport and a dog comes up and smells me for 2 seconds, knows I don't have a bomb, you know, I'm pretty happy. I'm pretty comfortable knowing, you know, bring whatever the hell you want on the plane. If it's not a bomb, I think we're going to be fine.
Like the liquid stuff, the taking off the shoes,
the liquid stuff. We need to get rid of that.
Yeah,
I think a politician can bravely stand up
take
and
all
get
the
rid
liquids.
of that.
Yeah, let's do one thing.
Let's focus in. That we should all be able to do. I should take any size shampoo on there, no problem.
Yep,
come on.
I agree.
Can you imagine how different our lives would be?
Yeah,
you can just bring any size shampoo.
It's crazy.
Yeah, every time I go somewhere, I go to Walgreens and I get the little fucking travel kit.
And it costs the same price as the big
sunscreen, things like that. It's like,
because they know it's for convenience.
So stupid. All right, that's our show this week. I was really hoping by the time this came out that we would hear from TSA, but they said they were not interested in talking to us. If you want to figure out a sneaky way to get around TSA, Darryl gave me some insight during our interview that I'm going to include in our newsletter. So if you want to hear his answer to that, go to nosuchthing.show. We'll also link to it in our show notes. No Such Thing is produced by Manny Fidel, Noah Friedman, and me, Devin Joseph. The theme song is by Manny. Original music for this episode provided by Zeno Pittarelli. Darryl Campbell was our guest. His new book, Fatal Abstraction, is out now. If you like No Such Thing, please rate us 5 stars. It really does help. Share it on social. Tag us. We're trying to get the word out. Working hard on this. As always, if you guys have a question you want us to get to the bottom of, or if you just got feedback for us, hit us up at mannynoahdevin@gmail.com. We do read every single email. And we'll see you guys next week.